I don't know how many times I've gotten to the end of the week and realized that I forgot to log all my time. The reality is our brains don't absorb and maintain a clear memory. You talk to anybody in the criminal justice system will tell you that eyewitness accounts are about the most unreliable thing that you can have. It helps. I had a friend who was a police officer who had terrible handwriting. It significantly improved his writing clarity. One of the things I also like to do, especially when I was leading a team, was to go customize that. But you have to be real conscious of the fact that when you have all that capability in front of you in your laptop, you can easily get distracted. Welcome back to Engineering Aerospace with me, Eric Kane, where we discuss all things related to engineering in the aerospace industry and help you advance your career as an engineer. So today's topic, I wanted to discuss something that's a little bit mundane for a lot of people, but is nonetheless, I think, very important to becoming a professional engineer, and that is journaling or taking notes. It's not something that's very glamorous, not something most of us like doing, but I think it's an important part of being a good engineer. And first, I guess that the question comes to why. Why do we take notes, and what's the reason behind why I think this is so important? The main thing is, just like when you were in school, is just recording information so that you have it to refer back to, right? There are a lot of instances where you're in meetings, you're having discussions about, a lot of complicated topics. There may be things moving around and changes happening all the time. But it's important to, write down what is occurring in those meetings and what you're hearing so that you can reference back to that at a later time. I can't tell you how many times I've had to go back and say, what exactly did we talk about during that meeting? What was the decision we made? These days, of course, some companies might let you use AI for note-taking, but even then it starts to record almost everything. It's not going to highlight the things that are most important to you. And there's always a little bit of lost in translation with some of that. And a lot of companies, particularly in the aerospace world, from a security and proprietary data standpoint, are a little nervous about implementing AI tools for record keeping. And so I think it's worthwhile for you to be good at keeping your own notes, organizing them in a fashion that allows you to easily search and recall information. And that becomes a very strong tool for you as an engineer to go have discussions with other management, other engineers, etc. You can go into a meeting where someone says, hey, we decided to do this. And you can go back and say, well, my notes actually said this is what we agreed to, and have some of that record. There are times where you just need, you hear a piece of information, you need to jot it down so you don't remember or have to remember all of that clearly down the road. You have notes that keep a record for you. The human brain, as much as we like to think everything in the moment is going to be remembered, the reality is our brains don't absorb and maintain a clear memory. You talk to anybody in the criminal justice system will tell you that eyewitness accounts are about the most unreliable thing that you can have. And so if you can write notes down in the moment when it's truly in your short-term memory and it's something that you have actually observed in real time, that's the best time to write it down, because you even wait a couple minutes, a couple hours, you get distracted, you forget, etc. So I think it's important, one, to record notes timely as you're hearing things come up. But it's also, when you start thinking about what's the value in this, is there are a lot of applications, right? We talked about recording decisions. Keeping a journal and notes also allows you to express your thoughts as they come stream of consciousness. And you never know when a good idea may come up, but it's not going to be useful for a long time. I mean, I've gone back to notes years later, right? So having a log and a record of all that is really useful. Now, obviously, if you're jumping around jobs, this starts to become complicated too, because a lot of the journals and the notes that you take are going to be proprietary, and so it's not something you can take with you. And so if you're changing jobs a lot, this is going to be really hard for you. I still think it's really important to make sure you keep notes, but the longer you're at a company, the more valuable those notes become, and the more you become the person that is the go-to when it comes to people asking questions about what did we do, what did we decide, why are we doing this. You can go back and say, well, this is the reason, we wrote it down a couple weeks ago, here's why we decided to go this route. It also allows you to do quick analysis, right? Like if you're just trying to get a rough order of magnitude, just jot some things down, and you never know when you may have to come back to it and reuse that information. And another piece of this is, I don't know how many times I've gotten to the end of the week and, realized that I forgot to log all my time. You're supposed to, in most companies, log the hours that you work on any particular topic every day. And, there are times where I just forget. You get busy, you fail to enter the timesheet appropriately, even if it's just the next morning. If you have a log of notes of things that you did for the day, makes it really easy to go back and go, oh yeah, I worked this, I worked that, and make that journal entry for the company's timesheet just that much easier and more accurate. And so all these are different reasons that you might want to take good notes. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, what are the methods that I use for taking good notes, and how are some strategies that you guys might be able to utilize as you're producing your own. So, the first thing, of course, is the balance between, do you want to do paper notes or do you want to do electronic notes? Now, I went to school in a time where electronic note-taking was not very common. There were laptop computers, but they weren't super powerful, they weren't super light, and they weren't something you took with you every day. So the vast majority of my school notes were taken in spiral-bound notebooks. And so when I got to the industry, it was natural for me to just continue that record keeping in a spiral-bound notebook. And so I use a lot of these computation books. Now, they're a little harder to get a hold of. Sometimes you can find them at office supply stores. Sometimes you can order them online. But the advantages in this particular format is, yes, it's a spiral-bound notebook, but it's really easy to open and close mechanically. It has numbered pages. If I can show it on the camera here. So you can record what was going on each page, and know if you've skipped something or lost a page. And it's also got a grid pattern. So for us engineers that like to draw diagrams and make sure we're writing in a straight line, this makes it a good, easy format to use. So, when you get these computation notebooks, they're with a heavy paper bound or heavy paper and outer, like almost cardboard outer cover. So they're pretty durable. I've had notebooks like this last 10 years, even when using them regularly. So they're a really good option if you're going to take written paper notes. But obviously there's a downside to paper notes, right? Which is that they're not as searchable. You can't organize them in different ways. You're pretty much stuck with a kind of a linear fashion, a time-driven organization. And if you're, good at remembering these things, sometimes you can go, oh yeah, this occurred somewhere. I think maybe in the summer last year. I can go back and find, within a few weeks of where that occurred, and usually find my notes. And so even with just that limitation, finding things isn't necessarily terrible. But there are times where it takes a lot more time to find the notes that I was looking for when I go further and further back in time. Whereas if you have an electronic format, it's much easier, obviously, to search that. The other downside, of course, is that if you want to record links to web pages, other internal documentation, a paper notebook's going to be really hard. You're going to have to manually put an address in there. Whereas an electronic link and electronic note-taking, that's obviously a lot cleaner, easier. You can, just click the button and it takes you where you need to go. So there is a trade-off, which is that obviously as you work electronic, now you're having to bring your laptop or some sort of computer with you everywhere you go. So the big advantage of, using the computation notebook is that it's really quick and easy. If I got a meeting, somebody calls, I just grab a pen, I grab my notebook, and I can run to that meeting. And kind of a side effect of that is that I am more focused in the meeting, right? I am not distracted by anything else going on my computer, no instant messages, no emails, no other work I could be doing. If all I do is bring this notebook with me, I'm focused 100% on the meeting at hand. And that, I think, is a kind of an underrated thing these days, right? A lot of people, if you go to a meeting, it's a table full of engineers sitting around with their laptops all typing. You don't know if they're paying attention and typing notes about the current meeting, if they're talking to somebody else, doing some other work. And so a lot of times, you see engineers that are very distracted. And so I think it's definitely worth considering if you should take some paper notes and see if your attention is better focused on the topics at hand that way. Obviously, if you have an electronic format and you're bringing your laptop with you, that does allow you to real time in meetings bring up other things, right? Like if someone has a discussion and says, hey, there's something about this particular drawing or document we want to look at, you can actually bring it up real time. And that's not something you can do with a paper notebook. But you have to be real conscious of the fact that when you have all that capability in front of you in your laptop, you can easily get distracted. And as much as we humans like to think we can multitask, our brains are really only good at doing one thing at a time. And if there's multiple things going on, it's just jumping between tasks and not fully getting engaged with any one at a time. So to get the best focus and best attention, I'd recommend keeping paper notes. Now, you can do a hybrid too, which is that, maybe you just take notes for the temporary in the meeting and then you record them later into an electronic format. And I've tried that as well. Downside, of course, being that you have to remember to go back and enter them. You may not remember as clearly the second time around when you're trying to do it, and you're doubling up, right? Because you're having to write it down in the meeting and now transfer it. But it also helps you reinforce a lot of what you heard, what you're writing. You can clean things up in a better organization, and you can stay focused in the meeting without having to bring your laptop. So, you can always bring, another notebook like this, loose leaf paper. Sometimes these engineering computation books, spiral or loose leaf papers can be really handy. So especially if you're just going to take short-term notes and then get rid of the paper copy after you've moved everything into the electronic format. So do consider, especially if you have a lot of trouble focusing and staying aware of what's going on in a meeting, I'd say give it a shot. Try recording things on paper for a little bit and see if your attention span, improves. So, I wanted to kind of go over some examples of how I took notes. We'll do some examples on writing notes by hand as well as electronic format and kind of discuss some of the options there. All right, so if I'm going to take paper notes, I like to keep things organized and use a consistent manner of writing, or at least a style, so I know what I mean when I go back to look at my records in the future. So if I'm using a notebook like one of these computation books, a lot of times I like to start each page kind of up in the corner here, but you want to make sure you keep enough room for all your notes to the right. So don't start too far to the right. I like to start to the left in the upper corner. And, I just like to block off each section by day. I'm going to use this computation pad here just to kind of illustrate what I typically do. And I would do the same thing if I were collecting loose leaf notes like this. The advantage, of course, of these is that I can, take notes in a hurry and then rip out the page, come back, record it electronically, and then dispose of the paper appropriately after that. But for now, just so I don't ruin my nice notebook, I'm going to show you how I write my notes in either case. So now if I am doing loose leaf, I like to use the top of the page to record things like what's the project, especially if you're working multiple projects at any one time. This is really handy. Then you might put, for example, your date. This might be if you're going to be collecting one page for a day. I'll show you a lot of times when you're using, obviously, a spiral bound notebook, you don't necessarily need to do a whole page for every day, but that's something I like to do as well. You can use other notes if you have to. That's the advantage of this style of sheet, is you can kind of record different things that are going on. Perhaps what's the topic. Maybe it's a meeting. Maybe it's something like an analysis or what have you. But you can kind of organize these however you want. But this is just kind of how I might fill out a sheet like this. Now, if I'm working in a, either loose leaf or in a spiral bound notebook, a lot of times I like to start kind of in the upper left hand corner, and I like to draw just a little I guess I'm not even sure what to call it. It's like just a little indicator to tell me where I've started a new set of notes. Now if I'm using a spiral bound notebook, I may also put this as a date. So for example, like this is February 15th, I may just jot down the date in shorthand next to the note, and maybe this is project a meeting, whatever your topic is that you're recording notes for at the moment. This is kind of just a brief description of the notes that are going to follow. Now when I start writing notes, a lot of times I like to use a bullet format, and I generally just start with a simple dash as a bullet, and then if I go down to lower levels, I might use a dot. So something like this. And so I'm building kind of a hierarchy, and I can have multiple, lines. And if I want to, maybe I'll do some other symbols as I get further down. But a lot of times I just alternate if I need to go multiple tiers, and just do a, dash, dot, dash, etc. This doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's whatever you want. This is just how I like to organize things as I'm writing notes down. Helps me kind of organize my thoughts, just almost like you would on a PowerPoint slide. And notice also I like to use a pen. You can use pencil if you want. A lot of times when I'm writing loose leaf, I might use pencil because it's kind of more of a temporary note. But if I'm using a spiral bound notebook, I like to use pen just because it feels more permanent and more of a record. You can always line things out if you realize you did something wrong. You go, nope, that wasn't incorrect. And you can make notes if you have to, perhaps it's corrected here. So that's just a basis, but I also like to use these notes to help record actions that I may need to do. So a lot of times I will like to use a box format when I'm going to create an action for myself. So this is an indicator in my mind when I'm looking through my notes that this is, hey, I wanted to go do something. I need to go make sure that I'm actually taking care of this. And when I've completed it, I'll usually just kind of do a check mark, right? Now, alternatively, there are times where I take a lot of notes and they sometimes get duplicated. So I may actually go put a note that, hey, I realized that I put this somewhere else and I'm going back through my notes. I like to just use a little arrow here, and especially if you're using like a numbered pages like this, I can go, hey, go see page 77. I've just basically repeated this. It was a duplicate. Don't worry about it. And then I know that I've transferred that action to another line item. Now, obviously, this is just the old-fashioned way of doing things. If you do electronic, you get a lot of the same thing. But, this is showing that you can do this manually. Now, if I'm on the same day and I have a new meeting or a new topic, I just put another little blocker like this, a little header. And so let's say maybe this is analysis 1, So this is a new topic. It's on the same day because I just haven't put another date. You can repeat the date if you want. I like to just put one at the first of the day. So when I get to the next day, maybe this is the 16th, I'll have a new topic down below that. And then I can very quickly read through and figure out what date I was on when I did certain things. So maybe this analysis has some charts. We're doing some things. We're doing some equations. Whatever the analysis is, I can take notes, I can draw graphs, I can sketch cartoons of maybe I was designing an L bracket and I was going to fasten it to some other sheet over here and I'm doing cross sections. So, the advantage of doing things in a paper format is I can do a lot of this kind of creative stuff real time without having to know fancy tools like drawing tools or do something that might take a little bit longer, especially if you're just trying to document some ideas and thoughts. And of course, one more thing, just consider if you're writing notes, make sure you're writing them in a fashion that you can read them down the line. I personally have just gotten in the habit as an engineer of writing everything in caps as much as I can. You can do whatever you're most comfortable with, but I like writing that because it's easier for me to read. It's easier for me to maintain some cleanliness. If you look at my actual professional notes, I'm even much neater than this. If I go back and read notes, anybody could go pick them up and figure out what I was putting down. I spend some time to just try to stay neat when I'm actually creating my notes. And that makes it just easier for me to review everything in the future. If you're one of those people that has bad handwriting, I definitely recommend trying to write in all caps, just plain script, because it really helps. I had a friend who was a police officer who had terrible handwriting, and he was instructed basically they had to write everything in all caps, and it significantly improved his writing clarity. So that's definitely something I would recommend, especially if you're writing. Even if you're doing drawing, addition, corrections, red lines, etc., that's a really good way to get in the habit of writing more clearly that way so that other people can read your text. All right, so now let's talk about keeping notes electronically. Now, the most common application you're probably going to see for note-taking is Microsoft OneNote, and that's simply because it's already included with most of the Microsoft packages for Office, Office 365 and such. If your company doesn't have it, usually you can ask for it. It's a fairly cheap add-on if your company hasn't already purchased it, and for the value, it's well worth it. And it's a fairly straightforward application to use. There certainly are other tools you could use for this, but I'm just going to talk through this because it's probably the most common, and it's one I've used quite a bit. So when you're looking at and you open up Microsoft OneNote, you have at the top level these notebooks, and these are ways of organizing your information. Make sure that ideally that if you're creating a new notebook, this is basically going to be a collection of folders of files. And so you want to make sure it's in a location that your computer can get to, obviously, but ideally it's a network location so that it's backed up. It's easily accessible from different locations. And you also can set up shared notebooks as well. For example, with a team, you might want to share information And so you can actually establish through Microsoft Teams a shared workbook as well. So you obviously probably want to keep your own records on a separate notebook so that, if you want to keep notes and things that you don't need everybody else to see, you can create that. And you can create that through different workbooks here. There's different ways to organize it, but a lot of times I would say it's probably best to create a new notebook for every major project that you're working on. If it's a new program, that kind of helps you kind of keep things categorized and organized, especially if, one program goes away or moves to another location where you can't access it anymore. It's good to have some of that separation from that standpoint. But within a program, you're going to collect notes in different kind of subcategories. So in this case, you can kind of see a few of my notebooks here on the left. This is just a personal example. I have my company one, and then there's this training example we'll kind of go through. But each one of these is a collection of notes related to a specific major project, if you will. Now under that, you have what they call sections. You can think of these as just tabs within your notebook if you have a physical notebook. And these I would organize typically by some sort of major category within the project that you're working. So as an example, for a long time I worked on the avionics navigation hardware team and for Dream Chaser, and so I would organize these by breaking each section out for the different major components that I had. So for example, I'll just rename this. Let's say I had a star tracker. Well, then I now have a folder, that tab, if you will, that is a collection of all things related to that star tracker. And then maybe I had a computer, right? So there's another piece of avionics. And, it's not renaming them. So let's just make sure that it actually renames them. And there, now we actually have these things renamed. And we can rename this to something else. Maybe I have, what's another piece of equipment, for example, a radar altimeter. All right, so these are all just different pieces of equipment, and perhaps they're made by different suppliers. They have different specifications, different requirements, a lot of different meetings involved. And so I like to break them up in that way so that I can keep track of all the things related to this one particular piece of hardware or design scope and make sure I'm putting my notes in one place. Now within this section, I can break this out any number of different ways, but a lot of times what I like to do is if I'm working with a supplier, I like to keep a section for meeting notes. So for example, supplier meetings, right? And so you notice that Microsoft OneNote likes to put in a time and date. So if you are recording notes, it automatically puts that in for you, so you don't have to worry about going back and manually entering that. But you can categorize these as another tiered level. You can either directly enter notes at this level, or you can, for example, add a page. Let's say there was, let's call it February 14th meeting. You can actually right click on here and say make a subpage, and now everything is under that category. So if I have a February 20 or 26 meeting, I can organize these by dates, right? You can organize them different ways if you want to, but I like to do something like this. In fact, I actually generally prefer to use the year, month, day format, right? Because this is easier to organize, like in a search. If you're naming files, this is also a good way to do that, because then they will automatically be ranked by file name in numeric or time order, right? So in date order. If you do it the traditional American method of putting month, day, year, that can get mixed up very easily. vice is the most significant being the year, then the month, then the day. And so automatic search and organization filters will automatically sort things that way. So that's the way I like to number my files. So 2026 02, let's say 14. So I'm just making up these dates, but you get the idea that if I have multiple meetings, every time I have a meeting, I can add it under the supplier meetings folder, if you will. It's kind of a parent category. I can even, for example, if I get long-term projects, I might even rename this to be, supplier meetings 2026. And so if I have multiple years, I can create another folder after that. Right? And then start putting new dates under there. So I'm not having to sort through, multiple years worth of files. You can organize it and break it down however you want, but these are ways that I found useful for organizing meeting notes. But you can also, for example, put in specifications, right? So maybe you have notes about performance, XX number of degrees and resolution, whatever you want to start recording, like perhaps as you're specifying out something. Maybe you're going to have a link. You can just literally copy and paste a link in here. If you use a lot of PDM tools, product lifecycle management tools, anything that's doing for configuration management, like maybe link to drawing documents, CAD files, you can paste links to that if there is a web address for them. So a lot of times you have an internal address and you can just literally paste that in here. And then you always have a quick link where you know how to go find it. You have it easily accessible. And that just makes life so much easier when you have dozens and dozens of different documents to keep track of. So when we were doing the paper example for note-taking, I showed you how I like to bulletize things and call out actions that I might need to take care of. In OneNote, there's an easy way to do that, and that's through this tags in this section here. And, there are different set of standardized formats you can use. You can also customize these. If you want to use out of the box, you might just click the to-do button, and you'll see this is now a selectable checkbox. That allows you to just kind of make a note to yourself that, hey, I need to go do this action, whatever it happens to be. And then you can kind of record when that action's been completed. And one of the things I also like to do, especially when I was leading a team, was to go customize that. And it's a little off the screen here, but near the bottom of this list says customize tags. And you can kind of either modify existing tags or you can create your own new one. So let's create a new one. And this might be like a team action, which is for something that somebody else on the team needs to do. But it's not something I need to do, but it's something I want to remember that someone else needs to go do. And so you can kind of create a tag. I like to use something like this checkbox with a person's action, head next to it, which kind of indicates that's not me, but that's somebody else to go do. And so it may be that, John needs to finish this drawing. All right. And so now instead of using the to-do tag, I might use the team action tag. And so this is now what they need to go do. And then when they've completed that action, I can check that off to make sure my team is completing the tasks that they need to do. And so that I'm remembering to ask them to make sure that they're actually working on it. Again, you can probably modify. This looks like this is probably automatically set to show complete. So you might be able to change the default on that. But in any case, you can add these. Now, the other thing is oops, I just put a tab there, but there are ways to kind of simplify these things, and you can add multiple tags, I think, to some of these things. Like, for example, I'm saying this is an important action that needs to get done. And the other advantage of this is even across all your notebooks or within a notebook, you can kind of do a search here and say, oh, find a tag that is, all the actions I need to go do, and you can actually do a search on some of these things. And so that can help you go narrow something down. If you don't want to go clicking through a bunch of tabs, this will automatically highlight all those items that are in the list of tags that you've already assigned to a line item. So makes it really quick and easy to go find your actions and other specialized notes, especially if you use more of these other tags along the way. So that's it for the moment. That's just a kind of quick overview of some of the techniques I've used for note taking, and a reminder that I think this is an important thing that a lot of people kind of overlook. But as an engineer, your job is to not just design things, but to make sure that you're designing them with a process, to make sure that you're accounting for everything that you have to make sure that the designs are going to work the way they're supposed to. You've analyzed them appropriately. And a lot of this is going to require you to have documentation, and having good notes can help you with creating documentation down the road, recalling what you did in the past, making sure you're not deviating from the plan that you guys agreed to in other, discussions. And so it just keeps you on track, helps you stay organized, and make sure that, as you move forward, you're doing the best job that you can as an engineer. So I think it is important as an engineer to take good notes and to start getting good at keeping records of your actions and decisions, and just making sure that you have that for future reference down the line. So that's all for today. So appreciate you joining me, and we'll catch up on some other topics next time around, and appreciate it. Until then, have a good one, and we'll catch you on the next one.